This is Matt Rosen, and this is The Grit Mindset with me, your host, Matt Rosen. The mission of The Grit Mindset is to inspire and empower our listeners by delving deep into the journeys of those who have faced significant challenges and emerged stronger. Through authentic conversations, we uncover the mindsets, strategies, and lessons that have propelled these individuals to overcome adversity and achieve success. My aim is to provide actionable insights and real-world advice to help our listeners cultivate their own grit and navigate their personal and professional lives with confidence and resilience. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of The Grit Mindset with Matt Rosen. I've got a friend and the first client of my firm here with me. I'd like to welcome Richard Maranville, CTO of Pinnacle Live, to the show.
Thanks, Matt. Super happy to be here.
Great to have you on, man. So tell us just a little bit about what you're doing right now. Tell us about Pinnacle Live.
So Pinnacle Live is an event company focusing primarily on events inside of hotels. If you've been to an Omni and had an event there, odds are Pinnacle Live had something to do with it.
Nice.
And we're in approximately 150 properties right now. We're only 3 years old, so really, really new. So a lot of growing pains coming with that as we've grown quite fast, and a lot of great opportunity ahead of us, both doing hotel events and other production events that we do as well.
No, it's awesome. No, it's a great firm. Know a lot of your coworkers, and it's great to be working with you again at Pinnacle. So tell us, what made you wake up one day and say, I want to be a CTO? Tell us about some of the early story and how you got here.
So I'm one of those rare people that has known what he's wanted to do since he was 13 years old. And I didn't really realize how rare that was until I, started talking to a bunch of people. But I was, my mom and dad had this odd custody thing where I lived in California for everything but the summer, and then I had to go back to Massachusetts and spend time with my dad, which, wasn't very pleasant when you're a teenager in Southern California in a beach town. But, it was before cell phones, so your friends weren't anywhere to be found. So he had a computer. I sat down at the computer, taught myself how to code, and also went with him to his coding class that he had at Harvard. And I thought I'll just try that, and loved it. And he actually sent the computer home with me that summer.
What kind of computer was that?
It was a TRS-80 Model 3.
Nice.
So with a cassette player to store the programs. And ever since then, I wanted to be in technology. I didn't know I wanted to be in management until I was probably in my mid-20s when I started my first job, and then realized I was a much better manager than I was a coder. As much as I enjoyed the coding aspects, I really liked the managing aspects of it.
So tell us about, a little bit about your early life. You and I have kind of talked back and forth in the past about both being paper boys as our first job, but I think you've done lots of other odd jobs in addition to that. So share a little bit of that with our audience.
Sure. So my mom was a single waitress raising my brother and I in Southern California. So there was no money. And one of the things I remember is asking for, I think, a bike, and her saying, well, if you want a bike, you better figure out a way to make some money to buy it. I think I was 12 or 13. So I got a paper route, and then from there went and also did that for 2 years, 100 papers every day.
Wow.
Jobs that obviously don't exist anymore. But I also did landscaping. I worked at the fairgrounds during the fair, selling corn dogs out of that tiny little corn dog.
That doesn't sound comfortable.
It was greasy, but it set me up for my next gig, which is at some point, I think I was 17, I started working at McDonald's. Again, it was steady hours, it was consistent, and apparently I really liked the grease from the corn dog place because I signed up for a lot of it at McDonald's. So I started at McDonald's and honestly worked my way through college, paid my own way through college, working at McDonald's for 6.5 years. And it was flexible on the schedule. It was close to my house, and it was easy to juggle that along with going to school full time.
Yeah, that must have been challenging growing up in those conditions and having to kind of put yourself through school while working, nights and weekends and probably any spare moment.
Nights, weekends, adjusting your schedule. I had a friend because I did undergrad at a community college, which was in my city, but the 4-year school was 45 minutes away. So to get there, me and this other guy who I met who actually lived in a city next to me, we would carpool, and both of us were doing this. One of us would sleep in the back of the car while the other one drove, and vice versa at night. So I learned a lot of, I had to work really, really hard for that. I got no sympathy from my mom, who was at her age at that time, probably call it 41, doing the exact same thing. She was going to a 4-year school to finish her degree while working full-time as a waitress. Wow. So the complaints were met with deaf ears from somebody who was doing the same thing and 20 years older than I was.
So both very gritty upbringing. So
very gritty. To this day, she doesn't want to hear any excuses on anything. Definitely has shaped kind of how I approach things.
Yeah. So you went to community college. You got a degree. What happened next?
So got my degree in computer science, minored in math. Always enjoyed the numbers aspect of things. I applied for a job at Kinko's, the copy company that's now known as FedEx Office. This would be early 90s, actually mid 90s. And then they were headquartered in the same city I lived in Ventura, California, and started as a coder. And I still remember my starting pay, 32 grand a year. It was a ton of money. I was super happy, and I got to work in an office.
Better than flipping burgers.
Better than flipping burgers. But I also, just remember that was the first time I worked in an office. So just navigating that and the basics of that. And nobody in my family really did that. So it was a very different kind of...
What did your dad do?
My dad was a loan supervisor. So he would give out loans at a couple different colleges in the Boston area. But I didn't really know what he did. He left in the morning and came back. And, that's one of the cool things I think we have now with tech. You can FaceTime, you can take pictures, you can do all this stuff to share with your kids what you do. They can see you working from home. They can see you on calls. My kids grew up actually seeing what I did, even though they've actually both interned for me at various companies as well. So, but yeah, I ended up kind of starting at Kinko's as a developer, and within a year got promoted to manage the team that I was on. There were 5 of us. We ran the store systems team, so point of sale and time and attendance, that kind of stuff for 600 stores. And they voted me to be their manager. And I was the youngest one of the crowd. I think I was 27 at that point. And as I found out, when you get access to everybody's salary, also the cheapest one. But I just also was patient because I realized, of course I am. I'm the youngest and I haven't been here that long.
Yeah. So you went from being a developer to managing the team, and then ultimately you ended up running that IT organization, correct? Tell us a little bit about how you were able to kind of maneuver your way up, not really having much of an example, at least not from your family or prior work history, to be able to do that.
Yeah, no example, which was odd. And again, I didn't realize how odd it was until I got some more experience under my belt. But I went from managing a team of 4 or 5, and then I went to being a director a few years after that. And there were times I remember when I went to the VP and when I was a manager, and he's like, what's your goal? And I go, I'm director by the time I'm 30. And he's like, well, that's bold. And I was like, okay. But why not go for it? What's the worst that happens? It doesn't happen, or it happens when I'm 32. The point is to keep moving forward and not get stagnant. And I've always done that. Now, Kinko's was great. It grew from 600 stores when I started to 2,000 by the time I left 15 years later. So there was opportunity with some of that growth that I was able to take advantage of. Plus, we went from being what we called paper on glass, back when you made copies that way, to all digital. Everything was sent via a file by the time I left. So that required a lot of technology and a lot of infrastructure in these stores to make it all work.
What were some of the maybe challenging story or two as you're coming up through the ranks at Kinko's?
Getting the respect of people that were much, much older than me. And part of it, in retrospect, was because I was a kid and I was immature in the work environment. I definitely see what I did then in my late 20s, early 30s. And I'm like, well, that's definitely not something I would ever tolerate now. But I was also schooled by my bosses at the time, like, this is why you can't do this. And I think I got really mad at some VP at his staff meeting because he wouldn't make a decision to help with, of all things, disk space constraints. So we were at this point, sale system was going to break if we didn't do something.
And he didn't want to do anything?
He didn't want to do anything. So I ended up getting mad at him. And as my boss said, you can't go into his building and his meeting in front of his direct reports and yell at him. I was like, yeah, that's a pretty good point. So those points have always stuck with me. And it's never been the technology that's the challenge. It's always been navigating people.
Yeah.
And at some point I became really adept at doing that and understanding like win-win. The person running the group has a goal, and our goal with tech is to partner with them. It isn't to run around them, and it isn't to make them look, worse. When they win, we win, because the whole goal is to have a successful business, not for me to look good doing tech. So And that was somewhat natural to me. I don't remember being taught that. That's just something that came.
Well, I remember when I first met you, you talked about, many people in IT would call it the business. You're like, no, it's not the business. It's not this faceless thing. There are partners.
Yes. And that was a big thing. Words have meanings.
Yeah.
And when you say the business, you make yourself something else, like you're a hired gun. So you almost, this is why I think sometimes, IT gets outsourced. It's like you're too busy referring to them as the business, and you're just the guy that does whatever you're told. I don't need order takers. I don't want to ever be an order taker. But to have a seat at the table and to actually be a businessman, you have to understand how the business works and how technology can contribute to that. So they're business partners. We work with them, and there's also no other groups that call the rest of the company the business.
Right.
IT is unique in that regard.
Yeah.
So, and that was something probably, I became CIO mid-30s, and I had a team of 300 at Kinko's. We had 2,000 company-owned stores, extremely complicated environment. So coming up that fast and having a team that large, being that young, the other thing I learned is, I'm a relatively quick learner and adjust as much as you can, because there's a lot of curveballs thrown at you.
So during that time, Kinko's got bought by FedEx, and that brought you to the great city of Dallas, right?
No, we were already here.
You were already
here. This is a misunderstanding for those that were around back then. Is we were bought by when I started at Kinko's, we were privately held by 145 different companies, so kind of a franchise model, but not really. And then a PE firm bought 40% of everything.
Okay.
Still not a majority. 5 years later, it wasn't going the way they wanted to, so they bought another 30%. Now they're a majority. They brought in a CEO from Dallas, and he brought us to Dallas.
Interesting.
This was all before the sale. So I did have a really unique opportunity to come to Dallas, though, and rebuild the entire tech team. And there were 30 of us that came, so there were 250-ish hires that we made in less than a year.
What was that like?
Hard, because you can just assume 10% of them are bad hires, right? But that's 25 people, and you've got to weed that out. So finding those bad apples took a lot longer than it should have. And then the folks that had the knowledge about the systems were in California, and they all knew that their jobs were, time limited, so they weren't exactly all excited about it. So very, very, very challenging, but again, something I'd never done before. And I was like, this sounds like fun. Let's figure this out. And I like challenges. To this day, I like new challenges.
Yeah.
It's really, really fun to solve problems, and that's what all these are problems. And people problems are by far, the hardest ones.
Yeah. Well, you hired a lot of great people. I mean, I got to know a lot of your network that was with you at FedEx that are all CIOs and some of them even CEOs today.
Yes.
What do you attribute that to?
I'm not going to attribute it to me. I will attribute it to the fact there were a lot of very smart people.
Yeah.
To the way that I guess I supported them as I give them a wide berth.
Yeah.
I at one point was a micromanager, and you can only go so far doing that. In fact, it's not very far at all. So you start recognizing that how they got something done was not as important as what got done, as long as they're being ethical, they're not treating people like crap, that kind of thing. So seeing all these people with these different styles, I started realizing there are a lot of different ways to get something done, rather than the type A hard charging, like, we're going to take that hill. And that works in some situations, but there's plenty of others that it doesn't.
Yeah.
And so, but you're right. I mean, I think there's at least a dozen people from that team that have gone on to be chiefs somewhere.
Yeah. Well, you did a good job of cultivating that talent, whatever it was, finding them, cultivating them, getting out of their way.
Yeah. I did something. And it's one of the things I think I've done repeatedly is tried to cultivate talent and try to grow it. Because the projects you work on, you're not going to remember those.
Yeah.
You might remember a few of them, but you're not going to remember most of them. The crisis of the day, it's just that, the crisis of the day. But the people and their success, and when you see somebody go get promoted and you recognize that you were part of that, or that they gave you outright credit for it.
Yeah.
Like that stays with you. Like that, those are the people you're talking to 20, 25, 30 years later.
Yeah.
So,
well, chapter ends at Kinko's. I know the story, but what happens next?
So Kinko's was bought by FedEx in 2004. And then I hung on until about 2009. Me and one other person were the last officers left from Kinko's. Everybody else was gone at that point. So we get into the 2008, 2009 financial crisis. Times are tight. So they decided to make some org changes. I didn't really agree with the org changes. So I opted to leave and left and went to a company called Freeman. And for folks that don't know, Freeman is the 800-pound gorilla in the event space. So almost I'd say 60% of the trade shows are run by Freeman. It's a $3 billion company, 3 times bigger than their closest competitor in that space. It's a niche space at that, but it's still an extremely interesting and challenging space from a technology standpoint. But I like that it was family owned. Kinko's was family owned at one point. Yeah. And I enjoyed that they were on their 3rd generation of family ownership. And the tech problems they had were fun, what I call fun, and that they were challenging.
Talk a little bit about some of the challenges you had to overcome. And you were at Freeman for what, 13, 14 years?
12 years.
12 years, sorry.
And then the first challenge were the people. The outgoing leadership had done some things that were questionable. So it was understanding, who's who in the zoo, I like to call it. And, why I've learned in my years to be a pretty quick judge of talent, and common sense being the biggest thing that you look for that is hard to find. So I had a lot of, evaluating the people first, and then systems are just that, they're systems. It's a method, it's a process, you go through it. What frustrates me are people that want to take shortcuts. And I say the same thing, you can go faster, but you're not going to take any shortcuts. You're just going to have to do things quicker. So you're still going through these same steps. And when I got there, they were in the middle of a SAP implementation, and we couldn't run payroll without this $300 an hour contractor we had on full time. Wow. And that was my first thing was, well, let's see if we can actually just run the systems without the contractors. And we couldn't. So it was also 2009 and a lot of event revenue. So Freeman's revenue is from marketing. And 2008, 2009 was not a boon in marketing. That was one of the big things that got cut. So we had some pressure to also cut. So I was able to pull back on some of the investment until I was able to reassess some things as well. So that was, the macroeconomy there was actually somewhat helpful in that regard. And then what caught me completely off guard was when I said there was this little system. I said we're gonna build that, not use this company out of the UK. And the president goes, "Are you sure you can do that?" And I was like, I've never been asked that question before. And I was like, that little app that sends issues to another person who can actually look at the issues, I think we can handle that. Yeah. And it realized that that's how technology was viewed by, the business partners and was a group to avoid, not to engage with. So that took a long time to kind of rebuild the trust and get people to realize that we want to partner. We're not going to tell you how to do it and tell you how to run your group, which is unfortunately what some of the prior management had been doing.
Gotcha. That's where you and I had the opportunity to meet and our careers collided. And
they did. And and we've run, we've been 20, 25 projects. And 85% success rate is great, Matt. You should be proud of that, okay?
Hey, I'm way higher than the industry average.
So, no, I think, I'll just say one of the other things, and the reason the companies I work with are important is because ultimately things go wrong.
Yeah.
There's no way things don't eventually go wrong. And that's when you get tested.
Yeah.
When, a success has many parents, a failure none, right? You have people running away from a project. Well, that was because it was bad. You have people like putting a name on it. Well, it's because it was good, whether they had anything to do with it. And you and I have had some pretty in-depth conversations about projects that have gone bad. And I think we've been fair with each other. Like, okay, we'll share in this and you'll make a little less margin and I'll have to write a slightly larger check and we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
So.
No, you've always been great to work with and a good mentor in how to deal with challenging situations.
Well, the other thing is to be upfront, right?
Yeah.
And because I think the conflict avoidance, resolved conflict builds trust.
Yeah.
And avoiding conflict just ends up taking longer to implode. And then by that time, it's so bad, you can't do anything.
Yeah. I think this is a great saying. It's bad news does not age. Bad news ages poorly. It is not a fine wine.
Yes. And that's also what I've always pushed with my team is I make a joke about status meetings, and I goes, everything good? Yeah. Well, we don't need the meeting. The meetings are there to talk about the problems and to make sure that we get all resources on the problems. But it's not a natural thing to talk about what's wrong. And something I learned early on with my CEOs that I've worked for, we had done this big release. There was an executive committee meeting of 20 of us, and revenue sort of was tanking right after the release. This was at Kinko's, and the CFO was like, I think it's the software. Something's wrong with the software. And I'm getting defensive about the software, right? And they signed off on it. The CEO stops us and he goes, I really hope it's the software. Because if it's because customers aren't walking in the door anymore, we have a much bigger problem.
Yeah.
And that's the first time I realized that's his perspective, is everything is his problem. Right. So, and I've used that many, many times when even with my own team, like I hope it's us and not, I hope it's a reporting problem.
Yeah.
And that there isn't like some revenue issue or some cost issue that is actually a problem.
Well, it's great to have that perspective. I do want to get to the rest of the story, but you're on the grit mindset. So I ask every guest, what does grit mean to you?
Perseverance.
Yeah.
Basically getting through it, not giving up, or understanding. And this is something that I think a lot of people don't do early enough, is ask for help.
Yeah.
You know, we're all type A, and we're all like, take that hill. But you got to ask for help sometimes. And whether that's your emotional health, something else that's not talked about enough, it's stressful at times. A company, whether it's going public, being bought, buying other companies, even in good times, it's stressful. So you got to ask for help, and you got to lean on your support network, which you are one of those people I lean on. So thank you for that.
Appreciate that.
But you got to leverage your support network and to get through it. So there isn't one answer to everything. But the other thing is, the problem's almost always a little easier to look at 24 hours later.
Yeah.
So give yourself a little bit of time. It's amazing what 24 hours will do.
Yeah. No, you're always good about that. Even if we didn't have the answer right then, you're like, go think about it, come back, and tell us how you're going to fix it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So 12 years at Freeman, any interesting, challenging stories you can share during your time there?
Some I can't, but as you know. So my first 6 years were CIO, and I did typical tech stuff, but I always gravitated the same way at Kinko's toward the customer-facing solutions. Yep. Whether Kinko's was a B2B company and a B2C company, so we would have tools for both. So if a consumer wanted to print something or a business wanted to print something, there were just different solutions that we sold to them. So, and in Freeman, it's all B2B, but we didn't really have digital tech solutions to sell them. So we supported online ordering, which is just the basics these days. But we wanted to kind of create a suite of offerings that we could actually use to take that market share that we had and keep expanding it, and to use as sort of a first entry point into a new account. So maybe the new account didn't want to use our main services, but was willing to use our digital services. So I took on a role of CDO to do just that, and built out a very healthy suite of products. We bought 5 tech companies in the process. That was incredibly interesting. At one point, I had 9 CEOs and their founders working for me, and that was eye-opening in many, many ways. I want to talk about people that don't ask for help. A CEO and a founder doesn't ask for help because there's nobody for them nobody to help them. So putting all that together, though, and taking the organic growth of the stuff we built, and then making that an offering, it was going really, really well. And then March of 2020 hits, and you end up with COVID, and people tell me their COVID stories. I say, I guarantee you, nobody saw almost 100% of their sales disappear for the next quarter in 3 weeks between early March and late March.
No, that was brutal for the Freeman organization.
And this is a company-owned, employee's been there 50 years, and everyone's just trying. And nobody knew at the time how long it was going to last. That was the other part I think people forget. Every month do we think it's going to be over? And if so, how are events going to come back? So we pivoted to virtual events, but all that software and all that pieces that have been built were what ran that. And the team that was doing a lot of that, because I had actually stepped away to go work as part of the business for a bit, working on process improvement. And I stepped back into that to help the team that was putting it together, because obviously it was all hands on deck to figure out the virtual platform. So did that for a while, and then I ended up ultimately, about a year after COVID started, deciding it was time to kind of bow out of Freeman and go look for my next adventure.
Yeah, and there you had the opportunity to actually be the business yet again.
Yeah, I did consulting for about a year, and that was I enjoyed that a lot. I didn't enjoy the sales part of it. Maybe I should hire you to sell me. Yeah. I mean, you're already selling me on anyway. Never mind. So actually, sell me. But then I went to Salad and Go, a very fast-growing chain of salad restaurants. We had roughly 40 when I started. The CEO, a guy named Charlie Morrison, who had brought Wingstop public and really well known in the restaurant industry. He and I had worked together in the late 90s at Kinko's, and we both had moved out to Texas from California, and we'd always stayed in touch, but we hadn't had a chance to work together again. So I started as CTO for him, and then as usual, I'm a technology person that loves the business, so I was inside the business. Those Kinko's years, and even more importantly, the McDonald's years, were super, super helpful, because restaurants are still the same. Do I have enough people? Do I have enough product?
Yeah.
The same two questions that you're worried about. And a lot more tech, of course, but I did that. And then he asked me to be COO and actually run the store operations while keeping technology. And so I hired a very strong leader to run technology, a woman named Trisha Wakeford. And then I focused myself on the operations side of the business.
Yeah. Were there new challenges you had to learn to overcome on that aspect?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very distributed team. It's, you're talking thousands at this point. I think it was roughly 2,000. And I think we had about 80 stores at that point. So we were opening up in new markets. And within tech, you can get your arms around everything. You really can't get your arms around an operation like that. So there's always things going on you're not going to be able to know about.
Yeah.
But there are similar traits in terms of the leaders that you work with, supporting them, enabling them, making sure that everybody feels comfortable talking about the problems. That is not unique to technology. That's a pretty, that crosses whatever functions that are out there. So a lot of those same things that made me a good technology leader made me a good business leader in general. And operations was that. In fact, so much so I did that for about 15 months. And then was asked to leave operations and go to supply chain and apply, my skills there.
Yeah. Well, man, you've done a lot of things in your career. Is there anything, if you were to go and talk to your younger self coding on your dad's computer, you would tell him?
Well, it's not what I would do. I've got two kids that are both computer science majors. One graduated from OU last May. She's now getting her master's in business analytics at SMU. And then the other is a freshman at sophomore in UTD in computer science. So I have this opportunity to tell them what, I would do differently. And a lot of it is the soft skills piece, the tech, finding developers and finding code, and especially in the day of AI. That isn't going to be a differentiator.
No.
The super developer, the 10Xer, maybe they still are, but if AI costs, 10X less, so what? So it's making sure that they're focusing on the areas that you can add value, which is running the business. And they've listened to me on conference calls for a decade, especially during COVID when you worked from home. They got to hear me on a lot of calls. And they got to hear both sides of it, and they actually a lot of that sunk in.
That's great. And one of the things I always worry about, my kids are younger than yours, but you and I had to work a lot harder to get where we are. Anything you've done specifically to instill grit in your children? Yeah,
that's a fantastic question, because that is a big worry of mine, especially raised from a single mom to how's the gated community, and and a lot of it was having limits and understanding that there's always a no coming at some point. And the way kids work is they'll keep asking until they hear it. So not that I would tell them no, without some sort of reason, but they understand that there's a no, and that you have to earn it. And when it's your money, it means something different. So I insisted both of them get jobs in the service industry. So working in restaurants, they both have done that. So you can get the experience of what it's like to be treated that way.
I think everyone should have to do that.
Absolutely. And so they've done that. And then, I've also supported them in going through interns with my companies. So they've had that perspective too. So I've certainly given them some help. I mean, who wouldn't want to help their kids? But it's always been earned. And I also give them this small speech, which is, you have my last name when you're working at the company I'm at. The expectations aren't the same. They're a lot higher.
Yeah.
So, and that also gives me a chance to coach them, which they're both incredibly willing to be coached, even by their dad.
Yeah.
Which I find, honestly a little fascinating.
Yeah. No, they're great kids. Well, we're running short on time here, but I really appreciate you coming on the show, sharing all your insights. Any kind of final closing thoughts you can share from your experience with our listeners?
Yeah. Focus on what you're doing. I see too many people focusing on what everybody else is doing. Why is that person getting treated this way? Why is that happening? Put your head down, do the work. I'm not saying don't navigate the corporate, culture. You need to navigate that.
Sure.
But don't make it your primary job. Don't play politics. You don't look better when somebody else looks bad. And a lot of people like to think that. So focus on what you're doing. Empower your team. There's a 10Xer in the developer world. There's a 10Xer in the team world, which is you let your team do their thing and you help them solve their problems. One, it's an easier job, to be honest. And two, they'll feel accountable for it. And they need to feel accountable for it. And then you help with the problems and you take the bullets and so that they can go be successful. So that has worked really, really well for me over the years, and certainly refined that in my, advanced aging here.
Well, any other final closing stories or thoughts? Don't build applications on SharePoint.
Yeah, Matt's referring to a poor decision made in, was it 2010?
Yeah,
that was the last poor decision I made, actually, which is pretty good. So
doing great after that.
Doing great after that. I would say another technology-specific thing, which is this idea that sometimes the tech you choose is a make or break decision.
Yeah.
It's not. If you're running a business unit, I guarantee you they could give a crap less whether it's running, this particular software, that particular software. Does it work? Does it meet their need?
Yeah.
And I ran into this because we were using some old software, packaged software that did a bunch of things at the restaurant company I was at. And I'm like, yeah, it's old. But it's also proven. It works. And the users don't care. Like, they need it to work. So a lot of the newfangled stuff is neat, but not when it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So put your mind in the spot of the person running the business unit.
Yeah.
Not always the technologist.
No, that's fantastic. Well, thank you for coming on the show and sharing your feedback. Thanks for being our first client. We would not be where we are without your partnership and your friendship. I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your story, and hopefully all the listeners out there can glean some insights from Richard's stories. And he's had a great, successful career. Glad to have him as a friend and a guest on the show. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up this week's episode of The Grit Mindset. This is your host, Matt Rosen, signing out. Stay gritty.